Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat. Tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsuraya. Tejo varimridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha. Dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation of three gunas appears in him as though real, like water in mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amrutadrava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahmarshi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar again and again. So we are now entering the third chapter of the second Skandha of Bhagavatam, and we are in the middle of the beautiful discourse being given by Shuka Brahmarshi in response to Parikshit's question about what's the right thing to be done by a man about to die. So, Shuka Brahmarshi continues by saying first that, hey Parikshit, I have told you the answer to your question of what needs to be done by a man who is about to die. And just to recount, what Shuka Brahmarshi said was, such a man, in the first chapter he said, he should leave the house and go to a sacred place, sit in solitude, and contemplate on the letters Om, A-O-M, Om, which is the representation of the Supreme Brahman. So he starts from there, which is the impersonal form in the form of a word, in the form of a sound of the Supreme Brahman. And then he moves on to explain that one can visualize this Brahman, all pervading Brahman, as the cosmic form, the Virat Rupa, which is a vision also given by Krishna in the Gita of an all encompassing form that includes everything and is terrible looking, awe inspiring. And from there, he moved in the second chapter to the sweet form of Paramatma, the indwelling Supreme Self, and the form of Vishnu, which is pleasing. And then he concluded by saying that even sweeter than that is devotion to Krishna, to Vasudeva, which purifies the hearts and accomplishes what is necessary for a one who is about to leave the body. Now, Shuka Brahmarshi describes also the various other deities that are there in the Vedic pantheon and what are the results they get out of it. So, having described the highest purpose and the highest way, the highest good by being completely devoted in bhakti to the Supreme Being, now he details all the various partial deities and the various fruits that one can get out of them, ultimately concluding that all of these are temporary and not the ultimate good. So, this is exactly as revealed by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita in the 7th chapter also, where Krishna says in the 23rd verse that those with deluded intelligence or those with limited intelligence, they worship various deities, Devas, and they attain the results which are all temporary. Whereas the one who surrenders to me attains me, which is eternal. So the verse is beautiful in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Antavattu phalam tesham tad bhavati alpamedasam devat devan devayajo yanti madbhakta yanti mamapi. He says, Antavattu phalam, the fruits which are limited or temporary is what is sought by those with limited intelligence, alpamedasam, and those they worship devas, devan yajo yanti. So devan deva yajo yanti, they worship the devas and they reach the devas, are the fruits given by the devas. Whereas those who surrender unto me, the Supreme Being, reach me, the eternal abode. Madbhakta yanti mamapi, my devotees attain me. So here Shuka Brahmarshi describes what are the various devatas, because Bhagavatam is a complete teaching. He doesn't leave out anything, just so it is all clear and one is not deluded by this. Because if we go to the Vedas, there are various prayers and various rituals for attaining various goals, and some may quote the Vedas and say the Vedas say this and Vedas say that. So Shuka Brahmarshi acknowledges all of that, and he quotes the results also one can obtain from these forms of worship, and then ultimately asserting what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that the one with clear intelligence will not fall for these kinds of limited, temporary, impermanent goals, but will go for the highest good, which is complete liberation and the eternal abode. So then he describes, just to detail, that one who seeks knowledge can worship Brihaspati, one who seeks sensory pleasures can worship Indra, one who seeks progeny or children can worship Prajapati, one who seeks prosperity can worship Maya, one who seeks energy, powerful energy, can worship fire, one who seeks wealth can worship what's called the Vasus, one who seeks power can worship the Rudras. Rudras are a partial manifestation of Shiva. One who seeks food can worship Aditi. One who seeks an abode in heaven, Swarga, can worship the Adityas. One who seeks the the boon of long life can worship the Ashwinis. One who seeks great energy and stability can worship earth. One who seeks charm can worship the Gandharvas. One who seeks a beautiful wife can worship the Urvashis. One who seeks lordship over the world can worship Brahma. One who seeks fame can worship the yajna or do yajnas, the form of yajna. One who seeks learning can worship Shiva, because Shiva provides true wisdom. So that's also mentioned here, that one who seeks wisdom can worship Shiva, and one who seeks good marital bliss, a good married life, can worship Uma or Parvati, because Uma, Parvati, and that is Parvati Shiva, is considered the ideal couple, and therefore one who worships Uma or Parvati can attain marital bliss, a good married life. And one who worships Maruts can attain bodily vigor, and one who wants to acquire some black magic or malevolent powers can worship this deity called Nirriti. One who wants sense gratification can worship moon, the personification of moon, which is Soma. Thus he lists all the various devatas and what they provide, and this all is covered in Bhagavad Gita by this verse of the verse we quoted of Krishna, where he says, all of these are temporary. Antavattu phalam tesham. That is, they are all temporary fruits, and they are worshipped only by alpamedhasam, those of limited intelligence. Because true intelligence, as Parikshit has asked, is to recognize the highest purpose, so that one doesn't come back in the cycle of birth and death. One is not beset with the fear of old age and disease and death. One is not tossed about by desires and fears, but one who desires to only reach the eternal abode, which is called the Paramam Padam, the supreme being. That is the highest intelligence, to recognize our true self as one with the supreme self, which is Paramatman, which is the all-pervading Brahman, and which manifests as Bhagavan. And to attain that is the highest goal or the highest sign of intelligence. Whereas those who are seeking all these other things like power and money and sons and marital life and all the rest listed here, they're all in this category of what Krishna calls Alpa Medhasam, that is limited intelligence. So that one verse is elaborated. So again, as we see, Bhagavatam is like an elaborate commentary on Bhagavad Gita. What Krishna mentions very briefly, succinctly, by saying that those who worship Devas go to Devas, but those who worship me, surrender unto me, reach me, is elaborately being described here by Shuka Brahmarshi, where all the various Devatas and the fruits they can provide are listed. And then finally he concludes by saying, but a wise man, however, whether he has no desire or he has even all kinds of desires or he seeks even liberation, he ought to worship the Supreme Being with intense devotion. So that's the conclusion, that even if one has desires, see, all these desires are there because of vasanas, desire for power, desire for wealth, and all the rest. But if one goes about fulfilling these desires by going for partial worship and asking for these kinds of boons, they may be satisfied, but which in turn generates more desires. Whereas if one recognizes that there is one supreme being who is the source of all desires and who is the true fulfiller of desires too, but more than fulfilling these small desires, he can give us the highest fulfillment. So that's why Krishna says in the Gita that even if they go to these Devatas, they are indirectly worshipping me, because I provide what is to be given through the Devatas. So it is because everything is sourced in the Supreme Being. The cosmic form, as we saw, includes all the Devatas. So the Virat Rupa is a beautiful visualization that every Devata is included in that, and therefore every fruit they can give is included in that, every worship is included in that. So they are indirectly worshipping the Supreme Being by worshipping Devatas. But the one with intelligence directly worships me, is what Krishna says. So even if one has desires, if one recognizes that there is one Supreme Being who is the ordainer of everything, who is the Supreme Ishvara, and therefore he worships him, even those desires are purified. And if one has no desire, it's all the more better. Or even if one desires liberation, so here the implication is that even liberation, desire for liberation, is a desire of the ego, because it's only the individual entity which can desire that I want liberation or I want moksha. That's why dharma, artha, kama, moksha are all four goals within the realm of the individual. Whereas true realization is to recognize that he alone is. So there is nobody to attain anything, not even liberation. There is only the Supreme Being in all the forms. And to realize that, and therefore be completely surrendered unto him, that's the highest state of desirelessness, where there is not even the desire for liberation. So such a person, that's why here Shuka Brahmarshi says, the one who has no desire whatsoever is the highest, and he also derives that state or realizes that state by being completely freed of this ego, and thereby realizing that the desireless state is actualized by simply being completely free of this ego, which is the only trouble causing entity. Such a being also profits by worshipping the Supreme Being, surrendering to the Supreme Being, and the one with desires, including all the way up to the desire for liberation, also profits by directly worshipping the Supreme Being. Therefore, he says the purpose or the highest good that can be accomplished by a wise man, by an intelligent man, is only through bhakti, only through devotion, and also he adds through association with devotees. So bhakti is not merely some sentiment, but it is a complete dedication and devotion of making one's life. That's why he uses the word tivra bhaktena. So the verse here he says is akamak sarvakamo va mokshakama udaradihi tivrena bhakti yogena yajata purusham param. So akamaha, one with no desires, sarvakamova, one with all kinds of desires, mokshakama, one who desires even liberation, all of them ought to do what? Tivrena bhakti yogena, with intense devotion, yajeta, worship purusham param, supreme being. So if one worships supreme being with intense devotion, then regardless of what level of desire one has, or one is blessed with no desire at all, they all attain their highest good eventually. Therefore, Shuka Brahmarshi says that it's the discourses of and the easiest process of this, of having this tivrena bhakti, that is intense devotion, is recommended by Bhagavatam repeatedly, as we have seen, and it will come again and again, because it's the most practical way, is by engaging all the senses and the mind and the ego in simply devoting to chanting the name of Krishna or Hari, the names of Supreme Being, and listening to the birth and activities, that is what is called as Harikatha. So again, the famous verse in Gita where Krishna says, one knowing the divine nature of my birth and activities can be free of the ego, because it has this beautiful effect of engaging all the senses in listening to the stories of Krishna and his appearance and various avatars of Narayana. And by engaging in these stories, the mind and the senses are engaged in meditation with complete focus, which is not easily possible otherwise when one is sitting in other forms of meditation. So, thereby engaging all the senses and the mind and every faculty in listening to the beautiful stories of all these Harikatha, as it's called, one can be completely free of waves of passion. That's what. So, this is a very practical, beautiful, and most accessible process that is given by Shuka Brahmarshi here in Bhagavatam. That one doesn't have to, though he detailed everything, as we saw, he started from the most abstract, meditating on Om, and then to meditating on the cosmic form, and then to meditating on the Supreme Self in the heart, and then to envisioning the form of Vishnu, and then finally to the sweetest contemplation and hearing and chanting of the names and the stories of Krishna. Because it starts from the most abstract and therefore the most difficult to the most accessible and the most sweet. And that's why listening to these stories have this great effect when narrated by someone like Shuka Brahmarshi. So it is not some entertainment, and it's not because these stories many people can listen to it without getting this essence. The most important essence which Bhagavatam repeatedly gives, as we can see in chapter after chapter, is there are stories coming. We saw beautiful stories of how Krishna saved Parikshit, or how Krishna goes back to Dwaraka, and how Dhritarashtra goes back to get liberation, and how the Pandavas get liberated, and then how Parikshit is cursed. Every story comes, and it's very engaging to listen to the story. But if it's simply narrated as a story, then the purpose would be lost. So it has to be given along with the essential element, which is devotion and surrender to the Supreme Being. So that's why Shuka Brahmarshi says when one listens to it through association with the right devotees, those who are truly surrendered and not whimsically explained by some professionals or some entertainers and all that, but when it's listened properly with association of the right kind of sages, I mean, the highest being Shuka Brahmarishi himself, who gives this out of this pure state of complete freedom, complete non identification with the body, complete what is called as Kaivalyam, the state of total freedom. And such a being, because it comes from his mouth, that's why it is so sweet, Bhagavatam. And when it is relayed with this mood, then it brings forth the underlying message along with the stories, and thereby he says it removes all the waves of passion, purifies the heart, naturally creates an aversion for worldly pleasures, and creates love for devotion itself, the process of devotion, and thereby makes it the easiest road to realization. So he gives a beautiful process here, just simply having taste for the stories of Krishna and the names of Krishna through the association of those who are enlightened and those who are truly surrendered, and therefore getting it in the right mood, rests all waves of passion, purifies the heart, naturally creates vairagya. One doesn't have to build vairagya, one doesn't have to create dispassion. It naturally removes taste for all worldly pleasures like news and events and entertainment, and all the rest start to appear more and more meaningless, and there is increasing love for devotion itself, and he says it becomes the easy road to realization, to kaivalyam. And therefore he asks, who will not do this if he has the slightest intelligence to recognize that this is the easiest way to realize the true self? So this is the essence of Bhagavatam. Finally, after the in the third chapter, after describing all the other things, all the processes, starting from Om till everything we talked about the cosmic form, the Paramatman, and then also describing all the various Devatas and what kind of fruits you can get from the Devatas. Then he makes this beautiful conclusion that, so as you can see, compared to everything, this is the highest good as well as the sweetest and the easiest and most accessible, and it naturally, without any great effort, removes taste for worldly pleasures, removes passion, purifies the heart, and therefore he's saying, please take to this, and this is all you need, Parikshit. What else you need? So with that, he stops for now, and Suta Maharshi stops his narration too by saying, this is the essence of what Shuka Brahmarshi taught. Of course, the whole of Bhagavatam is going to expand on it, as we said many times, that now that he has said the glory, the ultimate glory or the ultimate greatness is to simply listen to the sweet stories and to completely be absorbed in it. Of course, we will listen to a lot of these wonderful stories of devotees and of the avatars, but this is the essence of the teaching that stops with here. So when it stops here, Shaunka, the listening party, the head sage of the listening party, the assembly, because as we can recall, this whole conversation that's happening on the banks of Ganga between Shuka and Parikshit is being narrated by Suta Maharshi to Shaunaka in Naimisharanyam. So we now go to Naimisharanyam, where Suta Maharshi stops his narration saying, this is what Shuka said to Parikshit. And Shaunaka in turn asks to Suta Maharshi, saying, it's so wonderful to hear about what Shuka Maharshi has Shuka Brahmarshi has taught Parikshit, but we want to hear more, because now that he has said the highest benefit is by listening to the stories of Hari, we want to know what are all the things he said. So again, Suta Maharshi draws it out of the listeners. He doesn't simply go on narrating, but he stops and sees how much they are taking it in. And of course, Shaunaka and the rishis, being highest quality listeners, they have relished what they have heard and they are curious for more. So Shaunaka says to Suta, please reveal to us. We are very keen to hear what Shuka told Parikshit, because we know that Shuka is the greatest of the of all that is qualified to talk about Krishna. He is completely devoted to Krishna, and he is also a totally enlightened Avadhuta. So he is the greatest qualified of all beings in expounding on this message of Bhagavatam. And Parikshit is the most qualified to listen because he is such a devotee of Krishna. He is the descendant of Pandavas who dedicated their life to Krishna, and Parikshit was from his birth and even before that devoted to Krishna. In fact, he also says that Parikshit used to play with toys as a child, and even those toys would be about Krishna. So there are these toys that one can make, and until recently, even these kinds of games were played, where children would make small toys and small um, kind of arrangements which reveal some pastime of Ramayana or Mahabharata and so on, or of Krishna's avatar. And it is still there. For example, during Navaratri, this is done in many parts where many of the various toys are used to depict these stories and so on. So Parikshit was doing that. He says, as a child, even Parikshit was engaging in these kinds of play to worship Krishna. And Shuka, of course, is so completely devoted to Krishna. Therefore, it is natural that the most sublime discourse would happen between the two of them. And therefore, please tell us more. And then Shaunaka also says, as a way of instruction for everyone, that what else is worth listening to, because for those who are not listening to this but simply wasting their time in all material pursuits, for them their life is stolen by the sun rising and setting every day. So when the sun rises and sets, everyone is marching towards death and full of fear and making plans to do this and that and trying to somehow extend things and making all kinds of plans for protecting themselves, protecting their family, while it's all in vain, without recognizing that ultimately one can live fearlessly, embracing the temporary nature of the body and the temporary nature of all relationships, by being fully in bliss and love here and now, by being fully surrendered. And that's the highest purpose of life, to live with great enthusiasm and great love, without projecting time, without projecting future, without looking for things to be done later, and without fearing for what might happen later, but recognizing that everything will happen as ordained and everything is temporary, and therefore being completely fearless. This state of fearlessness, abhayam, is the true gift of wisdom, and that's what Bhagavatam has repeatedly emphasized. So that's what here he says, that one who is not having the state of fearlessness, their life is stolen away and they are afraid. It is said, that the sun raises to come up behind us every day, and the sun is the same, but we get older and older and get closer to death. This is the state of humans who are attached to the body. Therefore, he says, one who is dedicated to Hari, to surrender to the Supreme Being, he doesn't have this fear. Whereas for everyone else, their life is stolen day and night with each sunrise and each sunset. And then he asks, what's the point of living like trees and animals and specifically, he refers a few animals for different qualities, like dogs, which are simply running around, or like pigs, which are eating anything, just looking for food all the time, or like donkeys, which are carrying burden all the time in a stupid way. So, this is what humans do. So, he is comparing like how men are roaming around like dogs, or eating like pigs, or carrying burden like donkeys, and living the life of animals instead of truly actualizing the human potential by living this state of fearlessness, as we said, which can be easily accomplished by listening to these great stories of Krishna, of the Supreme Being, especially this discourse of Shuka Brahmarshi to Parikshit, which directly and most effortlessly, as Shuka himself says, we saw, gives one the highest state of realization and total aversion to worldly pleasures, freedom from passion, and peace and calm. So, this is available so easily, and yet humans are having taste in things that animals are interested in, living like dogs and pigs and donkeys, he says. And then he also, Shaunka beautifully says that the ears that do not listen to these kinds of discourses and these kinds of beautiful stories and names of Krishna are simply holes, because they just take in nonsense and bring out nonsense. The tongue that doesn't talk about these things are like the croaking of a frog, because as we know, the frogs make sound all the time, but it has no meaning, and it's just an annoyance. And similarly, people talk all the time using their tongue, but it has no meaning. It is simply causing more and more disturbance and annoyance. So that's why he says better to be silent or talk about the transcendental sublime teachings which are communicated in Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and so on. Otherwise, the tongue is simply like the croaking of a frog. And then he says the head of a person, who it may even be a very decorated head with silk turban or with fancy hats and whatever he wears, it is simply a burden if it doesn't bow down to Mukunda. So Mukunda is the giver of liberation, Krishna. And if it doesn't bow down to the Supreme Being, then it is simply a burden. And that's exactly what people literally experience, the head with all the thoughts and all the various waves that are of disturbances, emotions, chattering, simply becomes a burden for most men. That's what Shaunaka beautifully says, that the head becomes a burden if it's not engaged in surrender, and the hands are like that of a dead corpse, he says. So every part of the body has to be dovetailed to this beautiful, sublime, transcendental process of surrender. Otherwise, they are simply, as he says, just a burden of different kinds. He says eyes are like the eyes of a peacock tail. So if you look at a peacock when it dances, it has a lot of eyes in its feathers, but they cannot see anything. They are just ornamental. Similarly, the eyes which do not look at the right thing, which do not read these beautiful texts or visualize, as we talked in the first two chapters, the divine form of the Supreme Being. Instead of that, if we are simply chasing all kinds of worldly images and entertainment and so on, they are simply eyes that don't even see. And feet are like roots of trees, he says, which do not go to holy places. If the feet are simply moving into all kinds of worldly places that are causing trouble, they might as well not move, like roots of trees. So Shaunaka gives these beautiful comparison to emphasize for himself and for the assembly of rishis, because he is the head of the assembly of rishis. So he impresses upon them why it is important to listen so carefully to what Suta Maharshi is giving, because he is giving the direct nectar coming from the mouth of Shuka Brahmarshi. As we always say, Nigama Kalpatoror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amrita Drava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam. So this abode of taste that is called Bhagavatam, coming from the mouth of Shuka like nectar, it has to be drunk by listening to it day after day. And that's what Shaunka is impressing upon his assembly of rishis, and also communicating to Suta Maharshi how much eager they are, because they are convinced of the greatness of this process and the sublime nature of the message itself. And then he concludes by saying, therefore, that if one is not in contact with the dust of the feet of devotees, or with the holy tulasi and all kinds of holy paraphernalia, then they might as well be considered dead. Because as we said, Shuka Brahmarshi already said that it is important to not only listen to these messages of Bhagavatam and Gita, Harikatha, the stories and the pastimes of Krishna and the messages embedded therein, it is important to listen to them from truly surrendered devotees and not from people who are using it for entertainment or making money and all the rest. So that's why Shaunaka says such devotees who are giving the pure taste of Bhagavatam, if one is not in contact with them, then one might as well be like a corpse. And then he says, if one's heart does not melt on listening to Hari Nama, when the names of Hari are chanted, when the beautiful various names of Hari, Krishna, Rama are chanted, if the heart doesn't melt, it might as well be stone. So these are all the various things he says beautifully. The ears are holes, the tongue is like a frog croaking, the head is a burden, the eyes are like a peacock tail, and the feet are like trees, and the body is like a corpse if these are not engaged in listening to, seeing, hearing, and serving and going to holy places. So, all of the senses essentially can be engaged in this process. So, the one way is to withdraw all the senses, which Shuka Brahmarshi first spoke about, especially for the yogis who sit in the right asana and withdraw all the senses. But that's very difficult, and that also creates a lot of resistance, because the mind always wants to go outside, the senses naturally want to go outside. Whereas this process is so easy, because we are only dovetailing the natural inclination of the senses and the mind to go outward by going outward to the right source, to the right object. So Shaunaka says, if one is not even taking interest in this, then what's the point of living? So he makes a very beautiful, heart-melting message that emphasizes the greatness of listening to this and the supreme intelligence behind being fully devoted to this, because it gives us the fearless state here and now, as opposed to being caught in fear and running after small bones of pleasure as dogs run behind. So that's why he makes this very strong message, and therefore he concludes by saying, please therefore tell us more of what Shuka told Parikshit. You have told us the overall message and the conclusion drawn by Shuka Brahmarshi to Parikshit. Now tell us more in terms of exactly all the other things he said over the remaining 7 days. So with this request, Suta Maharshi is very pleased, and now he is going to continue to relay what Shuka Brahmarshi said after this, which will be in the next chapter onward. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.